Good morning and a very warm welcome indeed to today's Movers and Shakers virtual event. My name's Lee Natasha Salter and I'm Managing Director for Movers and Shakers. I hope you've all had a really good week so far. For those of you who don't know Movers and Shakers, we're the UK's leading property networking forum. We've got over 25 years of experience in bringing together senior players in the property and construction industry. Today is our 5th virtual event, and we're really enjoying putting on the Movers and Shakers virtual events. If you've missed any of the previous ones, they've all been uploaded onto our Movers and Shakers YouTube channel, so please do take a look. And all of our live events are free of charge to enable them to be accessible to everybody in the industry at this time. So this morning we have a webinar for you. The topic is New World, New Order, Public Realm, Place Shaping, Design and Collaboration. And we're working this morning in association with Women in Property. Women in Property are really good friends of Movers and Shakers. I've been working together on many of our regional UK events, and they provide a lot of support and connections for women in the property and construction industry in the UK. So to welcome our contributors this morning, a warm welcome first of all to Lucy Musgrave, who is Founding Director of Publica, Louise Wyman, who is Design Lead for the West Midlands Combined Authority, Debbie Jackson is Director for the Built Environment for the GLA, and Katherine Marsden is Development Manager for Public Spaces in the Placemaking team for Grosvenor, Britain and Ireland. And our guest chair is Pat Brown, who is Director at Central. Now I've asked Pat, although she's chairing this morning, could she possibly contribute as well to the discussion, because Pat is absolutely a guru in terms of urban change, and I know she'll add much value to the discussion this morning. So thank you to you all for joining us. I had a really good chat with our panel and chair yesterday, and I'm particularly interested to find out what their perceptions are on picking up on the current sentiment at the moment, and how people are enhancing value, placing more value on the public space, public realm. You know, can we create this as an opportunity for change? Can we use this to innovate, to try new things? And I do hope that, as we had in the past wars, that something negative can be turned into a catalyst for social change and for good. So I'll be really interested to hear our panel's views this morning. There's a 40-minute session this morning, and you'll have an opportunity to quiz our panel. If you want to ask a question, do click on the Q&A tab, submit your question, and I know Pat and the panel will do their best to answer them in this given time. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Pat and our panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lee, and good morning from me. Gosh, we are living through extraordinary times. Lives are being lost and worlds turned upside down by this pandemic, and we have to live for the present in the absence of knowing how and when this will truly end. Nonetheless, amongst the heartache, the worry, and the personal and societal economic damage, there are some distinct positives. We have markedly better air quality in our towns and cities. Noise is drastically reduced and we are enjoying birdsong, and it appears we are seeing spring unfurl more intensely than ever before. That said, our ability to enjoy the positives is contingent upon our own experience. It is clear that though lockdown is universal, it is not equal and has highlighted significant disparities in circumstances. Many are living in crowded conditions, many with limited easy access to outside space, a state that is being exacerbated by our increasing densification of our places. We're also missing out on holidays, celebrations, and despite the wonders of Movers and Shakers and Zoom, events large and small. One of the things that I'm particularly sad to miss is a garden party I was due to go to at Buckingham Palace next month to celebrate the 125th anniversary of the National Trust. And given our topic of the morning, it is worth remembering that this wonderful charity, so often associated with country houses and rolling estates, was founded to improve the lives of city dwellers, especially based on Octavia Hill's firm belief in the need to create accessible green space for the urban working class and indeed the poor. As she put it, we want places where long summer evenings and the Saturday afternoon may be enjoyed without effort or expense. 125 years on, our public realm has been universally accepted. The importance of our public realm has been universally accepted. Yet this COVID-19 enforced lockdown has started to focus our attention in a heightened and fresh way. It was Winston Churchill who said, "Never waste a good crisis." So we will all be failing as urban professionals if we don't develop something positive out of this situation. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our fantastic panel on their individual perspectives of what we can do to seize the day and make sure that what we create from this terrible situation is something that we should be proud of. So we've already heard from Lee, who are speaking. Their wonderful CVs are on the website, so I won't waste time by repeating repeating everyone's name, but and job title. But believe me, they've got fantastic experience to talk about this topic. And I'm going to hand over to you now, Lucy, to give us your perspective first, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pat, and great to see everybody, and thank you for inviting me, Lee. I hope the noise is okay, because actually there's some roadworks happening outside my window, so there is some work happening in London. And I want to talk about the definition of public realm, because it really is our connective tissue. And I think, as Pat says, we are hungry for actually our social interaction, but also to be able to move through our cities again in terms of our urban neighbourhoods. London, and I'm going to speak about London in the main, is an extraordinary city in terms of our green infrastructure. About 47% of London's land use is actually green. A lot of that is our gardens and our parks. Actually, about 18% is public open space. And we've got over 9,000 miles of highways. So what is so extraordinary at this moment in terms of lockdown is us being able to imagine a future where we can deal with some of the issues about movement in a different way, and also in terms of our green infrastructure and our climate mitigation, and think about actually taking that highway space back. We've managed to do that at Publica. We were fortunate enough to work with Westminster City Council and a number of different players, Transport for London, to completely transform Bond Street in central London. And we put the highway on a diet. We took 3 lanes of traffic down to 1. We widened the footways, and we thought about the beauty of that street 3-dimensionally in terms of its civic amenity. We were very lucky to have been awarded the prize for the best public realm in London last year through the NLA. And I think that at this moment, in terms of sharing best practice, we've been looking, like many people on this webinar today and much of the audience, at what's happening internationally. And I know, Pat, you, in terms of your relationship with New York, have been talking about this extraordinary, the speed of tactical urbanism in terms of speed and scale of initiatives, both in North American cities, but also in European cities. So, for example, in Paris, in Brussels, in Amsterdam, there's a range of transport, green infrastructure, air quality, and climate mitigation that are happening at scale. Paris, as an example, has just instantly built upon its 700 kilometres of cycleways and added a further 650 kilometres as temporary cycleways. This is absolutely extraordinary. And they're doing that because of social distancing on public transport, that they want to encourage electric bikes in terms of movement of goods and active travel in every sense. There are initiatives in Reims where people are dealing with participation, so how we can imagine the future city in a very participative way through consultation as they come out of COVID. And in Brussels, they've turned the whole of the Pentagon, the whole of the centre of Brussels, into a shared space and taken the speed of traffic down to 12 miles an hour. So that's a really extraordinary thing to do in terms of being able to stand in a street, see the beauty of our cities, breathe the air quality, and actually think about these different forms of transport. Transport is only one aspect of it. But I think that the kinder and gentler society that we observed in our collective memory around the 1951 Festival of Britain, a time when we came out of incredible stress and mourning and real austerity after the Second World War, was actually a time when design and big strategic thinking about the creativity and the future of our society could really pave the way. We changed the perception of the River Thames at that time in terms of reclaiming some land and thinking about the experience of moving through a colourful and beautiful landscape where we could share our cultural and social infrastructure. And I'm very hopeful at this moment in terms of the creativity that we can bring for thinking about every citizen, so the very young and the very old. So not just the pace, going back to the frenetic pace of how we used to use our cities, but actually thinking about the importance of every citizen in a kinder and gentler way to ensure that the strategic decisions that we can make now are really impactful. Urban planning, the history of urban planning has always been about public health. That's where it came from. And so can we now begin to think about our cities in a different way as civic strategies between the public sector leading, the private sector, the third sector, all that creativity coming together to think about innovation, international best practice, a great time to share international best practice, and also what a civic strategy might mean in a digital landscape, because we have all been actually communicating so brilliantly. Thank goodness we live in this age where we can do this now in terms of talking to each other, speaking internationally, sharing international best practice, and actually finding a way out of this in terms of social and environmental equality and dealing with the challenges the 21st century are going to bring us.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Lucy. Now over to you, Debbie.
Thanks, Pat. And hi, everybody. Pleasure to take part this morning. I'm struck, firstly, by how events from the past have shaped us, and we just heard Lucy talking about the Festival of Britain. Two more I want to throw into the pot that I think are relevant to this discussion. One is our attitude to public space and how that took a leap forward as a result of the Olympics. And I think since 2012, people's ownership of space and public space being an asset that's available to all of us to convene, to celebrate, to debate, really enjoyed a leap forward as a result of the Olympics. Another sort of historical moment that I think shapes this debate as well is the recession of 2008 and the years beyond that. And I think what we saw come out of that was a huge amount of innovation and a real appetite to trial and test and flex. And I think both of those considerations are really relevant to how we respond to the crisis that we're currently experiencing. From the perspective of the GLA, I think we feel at a sort of strategic level that our priorities are in the right place. So the work we've done over this mayoralty on all of our strategies that prioritises considerations such as National Park City, healthy streets with a presumption in favour of active travel, air quality, public realm as well is a key priority in the London plan. And so we feel like at a strategic level, our priorities are well positioned to be able to respond. But we are going to have to look at everything through the lens of coronavirus. And some of the things that I think we're going to have to think about and we need to take into account going forwards is what the health requirements are around public space and how people interact with each other and move around each other. I think there's a really interesting debate about what is public space, and we've got a very broad definition in the GLA, but of course it's parks, but what about locked up garden squares? I heard a debate on Radio 4 on golf courses this morning, don't even get me started. And so, there's a whole, what is public space and what's the democracy around public space and how people access it? Because one of the features of lockdown has been, we know that some people have got better access to space than others. We're going to need to be thinking about phases of lockdown. It's not going to be lockdown one day, back to normal the next day. So how's that going to evolve? And travel and how we move around the city as well. So I think the sensibilities of the GLA and everybody were in the right place before we went into this. But we're going to have to do a lot of work to look through the lens of our current experience of the lockdown.
Thank you, Debbie. Over to you now, Kathy. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for having me on the panel. So as mentioned, I'm a public spaces development manager at Grosvenor, Britain and Ireland. And to add a bit of context to the viewpoint that I'll be coming at, so Grosvenor is a private developer, asset manager and major landowner in central London. The estate's been in our ownership for 300 years, and therefore the model of the estate is built on long-term resilience. It's really important in order to enable that. As a company, we have to really adapt and push ourselves, move away from business as usual and innovate, which is a word that has already cropped up quite a bit in just this morning. So we can continually provide good stewardship of our places. Challenges have cropped up, and I'd say COVID is definitely one of those challenges, but actually I also think it presents some fantastic opportunity for us to change and to change really quickly. For Grosvenor, reducing the impact of COVID and ensuring public safety, health and well-being is paramount, is imperative for us. I'm interested in discussing today further about possible spatial distancing measures that could be put in place within the public realm to make sure that people feel confident when they are returning to the street, but also we need to make sure that they're communicated really widely, because I think people want to, and with such a huge behaviour change, you can see that people want to help and people want to make sure that they're doing the right thing, but we just need to make sure that we're clear what that is and be able to communicate that to people, to also make sure people feel confident in returning to our streets and making our places, you know, amazing again. I'd also really want to touch upon today about how the public and private sector can and should be working quickly and effectively together to secure short-term and long-term change and create benefits from the current emergency. All our aims are the same. We all want to create good spaces, and I think we just need to make sure we keep returning to, you know, the UN SDGs, and part of the framework, one of them is partnerships, and I think we need to make sure we don't underestimate the value and the strengths of these good partnerships. On a personal level, I'm really passionate about sustainability, the environment and people. So I think today's discussion will be really interesting to see how we can make sure that that's all integrated successfully into urban design.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And now, last but not least, Louise.
Thank you very much, Pat, and it's fantastic to be in this group and here this morning. And I was reflecting, listening to the other speakers, again, on this notion of public space, because I think that's really at the heart of what we're going to discuss today. And actually, I think the two words are really important, public and space. Our relationships as the public, as the general public, as the public sector in my case, has changed unrecognisably in this period, I would say. And our spatial relationships have changed as well. So I haven't, until a month ago, I hadn't been in a space like this. I hadn't been part of a conference like this. So this time has been making me think really hard about what it means to be public and how you interact with the sort of private sector and the private development opportunities, and also what space means to us now. So it's been quite a reflective time for me, and I've also been reflecting on the past year that I've spent at the West Midlands Combined Authority as Mayor Andy Street's lead on design. And we have in that time two things I wanted to plug really, because we produced them just before lockdown. In January, we produced a design charter for the West Midlands, and I think the team at Movers and Shakers have uploaded that to the website. And I'll just say a bit more about that in a moment. And then in February, with Lucy and Sadie Morgan and the amazing group at the National Infrastructure Commission Design Group, we also launched the Design Principles for National Infrastructure. So they're both A5 documents, number 1, number 2, and they're also on the website. And so I've been reflecting on those two big events that happened in January and February in the design community, if you like, in the people that are interested in public space. And also what it means now when we're in this kind of COVID moment, and how, most importantly, we start to lift out of the sort of tragic and sad period that we've been through and start to rebuild our cities. And I think there's a lot been said already, but this concept of public space is quite ancient. It goes back to the Romans, I think, when they talked about nature in the city. I trained as a landscape architect, and we thought when we were students of as public space or landscape being everything that wasn't architecture. And actually, when you start to think about cities as the buildings and then everything else, it really helps you look at how the streets, the parks, the little mews or the cut-throughs between buildings all start to become part of that urban landscape. And that was the mindset that I had when we went to the West Midlands, and the charter was developed very much as a co-design document, working with 18 local authorities. It's a really collaborative act, 3 LEPs, many workshops, many post-its, all those sessions where you think, is this going to end? But actually you gradually build consensus, and we were able to launch the charter at the end of January with the full support of our 18 local authority partners. Authorities like Stratford and Shropshire have now adopted it through their planning systems. The other authorities have committed to doing the same. And it's raising the bar, I think, in terms of how we think about creativity and public realm. And there's a lot that echoes across to the National Infrastructure Commission's document as well. I won't go into huge detail because it is on the Movers and Shakers website, but we had 6 core themes, and I just wanted to touch on those as I finish up. The themes of the charter around character. What is the West Mids character? And again, I think that's going to be something we'll think about differently after this time. Connectivity and mobility. We thought about this as our transport network, the TWFM, much like TfL, the network that runs the transport systems for the West Midlands. But actually now connectivity is something different again. It's about digital connectivity. It's about visual connectivity. It's about trying to reach each other in a way when you can't physically be in the same space. Future readiness and climate resilience was absolutely integral to the work we brought forward on the charter, and all this work is really parallel with our 2041 net zero carbon ambitions for the West Midlands. The 4th concept of the charter was health and well-being, and actually now that feels like it should be the primary concept and something we can develop in the discussion. Engagement and stewardship was the 5th, and again that's so central to all the work we're doing, I think, in public space. And then delivery was the kind of driver of the charter to begin with. If we're going to change places, how do we do it in the way that those principles help us think? So a little bit of a plug for the West Midlands Design Charter, and also for the work of the National Infrastructure Commission's Design Group, because we've been thinking in this space and we're now having to develop our kind of next steps in a virtual space.
Thank you very much. Brilliant contributions and so much there. You know, clearly there's already a bedrock of work that's going on, and we've got ourselves over the past, I reckon, 2 decades to a good place, and in thinking about public realm in a very different way. And Lucy and Debbie have evidenced, well, you've all evidenced that to a certain extent, but we are in a very different situation, and we are also going to be looking at significant budget cuts because of the financial constraints that this will no doubt place on us. So if this isn't going to be nice words, who's going to be responsible for taking this forward? How are we going to make sure that we actually supercharge this and don't sit around in a year's time thinking, it's a shame we didn't do that quicker? Take the examples that you've just given, Lucy, of other cities, for example. They've acted really fast. So how do we make this a reality, not motherhood and apple pie? Lucy, do you want to kick off?
I think that the UK does have very different circumstances in terms of our governance and decision making, and you know, some of the cities that I was mentioning in terms of the mayoral budgets and their, you know, authority in terms of being able to act very quickly at the municipal scale is something that, particularly in London, it has always been about negotiation. This is negotiation between our citywide government and our boroughs, but also between the public and the private sector. And that is part of our condition here. And actually there's got great strengths in that in terms of negotiation. I think that what Louise has just described in terms of consensus building around principles, in terms of what are we all trying to achieve and how do we get there, and what are the roles and the roles in terms of accountability, and to ensure that this is opened up and participative as a transparent process, is something that I think people, in terms of their creativity and their individual agency, as well as their own businesses, as well as their roles as public servants, this is an extraordinary moment to come together as, you know, as our city authorities, as our, you know, investors in terms of the businesses that are run, and to begin to do this in a much, much clearer way, in a coherent way, because I think at times it can be quite piecemeal. And actually some of the questions that have been coming in, Pat, to you, I'm just seeing them on the screen. You know, is it too fragmented? Should we have a single authority? This is a question about London from Brian Quinn in terms of the need for a single streets authority, because obviously there are many negotiations in terms of what places like the London Borough of Hackney can do very quickly in terms of their own streets with regards to closing off doing temporary measures around green infrastructure to make it only for emergency vehicles in this moment. We have just launched with the Deputy Mayor Jules Pipe, the policy for Debbie's Good Growth suite of documents for the GLA about a child-friendly city. So independent child mobility and for young people, which is absolutely critical to public health. So a borough like Hackney have done a lot in terms of their leadership, but should we be actually doing something in terms of more coherent approach across the UK so that we can actually compete with some of those great international case studies who are going very fast. On the question of funding, you're absolutely right, Pat, in terms of we are going to be suffering. This generation, in terms of people who are now, you know, coming out of school, out of university, are trying to hit the jobs market. What can we do? Well, we can do this in terms of actually many of the things that Louise and I have been speaking about at the National Infrastructure Commission Design Group are actually not about big budgets. They are thinking really creatively left of field in terms of what we can do in the short term, as Kathy says, the medium term and the long time out of lockdown. So it doesn't have to be about big infrastructural budgets. It has to be about mainstreaming principles and making sure that we've got the governance and the decision-making process that is participative, in my opinion.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I'm going to ask Kathy to come in and just talk about the private sector perspective, and I'll move on to some other questions because there's a lot of questions already coming in and I've got lots to ask you as well. Thank you, Kathy.
So I think your question is really pertinent. How do we stop the discussion and the strategy and move into delivery? And actually, I think you're right. We've gone unexpectedly into this experiment where it's like the biggest work from home experiment. And I think that word should be sort of capitalized on and like moved through, because now what's going to happen is we're going to go into the biggest experiment of public health and safety and well-being into the public realm. So, you know, simple things such as making sure we have our high density, high footfall streets. They're going to be the biggest streets at risk. So what temporary measures can we put in to enhance spatial distancing? Now, it could be ideas such around as, you know, just temporary pedestrianisation of that street. It could be simple things such as, okay, where the car parking spaces are, can we actually put tape down? Can we put a pot plant down and say, for now, in the short term, this is going to be a double wide pavement? And, you know, it could be things like just, we need to reclaim the space that we have and make it more flexible. You know, there's lots of discussion about retailers and restaurants and actually, you know, should a restaurant open being 50% occupied? But that's not going to work for their business model. They have to, you know, make an income. So they're not going to open unless they can be fully occupied. So actually, can we utilize our streets? Can we have slightly more al fresco dining? Can we have, you know, people moving out into our streets and use it in a different way and have that as an experiment? And when it comes to things like budget, I think you're right, Lucy, we have to be innovative. You know, there's other countries that have just put tape down on the floor and that's now a new cycle lane. You know, we can put a pot plant out. These don't have to be really expensive measures. We don't have to go through, you know, tender, design, you know, getting the right architects in to do it just yet. I think what we can do is we can see how well, you know, that's taken up. And what will be interesting to see is, okay, is that something now that we could look into for the long term, for the benefit of climate change, for the benefit of public safety? And it'll be really interesting to see whether or not we can, you know, it's imperative that we work all together openly. And I suppose the thing I want to say is that public and private isn't just about, you know, developer and council, it's about community. It's their third prong in this triangle. And actually the community spirit that has been seen over this time has been unbelievable. It's been amazing. And I think we really need to make sure that we're galvanizing that community spirit and, you know, asking, what is it that you want? How can we do this? Can the community, and like lean on our community groups and keep it as an open dialogue, and that way we can build trust and respect. I mean, simple, you know, at Grosvenor we've just started a WhatsApp group. Can
I stop you there, because we've got tons of questions and all of these fantastic answers, so I apologize for kicking in, but your point about community is such an important one. And you know, over the past 20 years, people like me and Lucy and everyone on this call have been initially thought they were screwy talking about public space and advocating for taking cars out of places or making more pedestrian friendly places. It was really hard. I bear the scars of advocating for Trafalgar Square's pedestrianisation. And so, you know, but what we have had is the biggest experiment, as you've already talked about, in behaviour change. And what we've been enabled in, as a consequence of that, is to see the instant results of what happens when everybody changes behaviour. And previously, people have not wanted to give up their car or give up their something because they didn't see the results quick enough, because it was very incremental. We've stopped with the incremental. We've gone on to an incredible result, which is better air quality and reduced noise pollution at least. So how do we use this moment of massive behaviour change to actually reuse our spaces differently in the way that you've been talking about? And if you look through the questions that have been coming in through the public, from our audience, some of this is about how do we utilise space fairly, and then in terms of the denser urban areas where it's actually there is a definite space deficit, how do we look at land use differently? So could you address that? It's a combination of behaviour change and equity and land use, please. Take whichever one you want, and I'm going to go to Debbie first.
Okay, it's just a small question, but a good one. So behaviour change, first of all, I think that one of my biggest fears is that as we start to move through the later stages of lockdown and we move on to the new normal, or whatever we're calling it today, the people forget to hold on to what they've enjoyed. Because there is a huge movement at the moment. Everybody's talking about the joy of the empty streets, you know, the kids chalking hopscotch on the pavements, you know, me taking my 8-year-old out on the actual roads on his bike, not on his car, on his bike. And that is, you know, the power of the population, if you like, and how we feel about this. It, to me, will be one of the strongest forces and agents for change. My biggest fear is that when life takes over and things are super busy because so much stuff has been put off, the emails and the inbox grows, the meetings go back in the diary, that we just forget. And I think it's on all of us to hold on to these behaviours. And the climate change movement over the last 18 months has demonstrated actually how much power public opinion can have in the current, the current context, with the ways we have to communicate and impress our views upon policymakers. So I think that for me, there's something about a responsibility on everybody to actually hold on to those behaviours and create the case for it. In terms of how land is used and the economics of land, I can see the questions coming in. I mean, there are webinars taking place on this right now. You know, what will happen to viability of development and the economics of land? And I think one of the really challenging things for cities is that agglomeration, clustering, busyness is the bedrock of the economy of cities. And while on the one hand we are all enjoying being at home and we're talking about flexible working days and people working from home more, on the other hand, that really threatens the success of our cities and our sort of agglomerated places. So for me, there's a tension there. It's not really an answer, it's more of a question. But I think this is what we're going to have to work through over the coming months.
Great, thank you very much, Louise.
I thought it was a great set of insights from Debbie. I think probably all of us will be reflecting on this time. There is a lot of sadness, but there's also a huge amount of creativity. I've been really struck by the enterprising ways that people have already started rebuilding networks. At the moment, we're seeing it more in the virtual space, although we are, back on site. Construction is returning. Quite a few of our housing partners in the region are back constructing at safe distance. Louise has given us an example of sort of construction noise in the background. So things are steadily returning, but in a different way. So we've seen big behaviour change. To give you an example of what we're doing in the West Mids, and actually I think your point was really good, Pat. These documents that we produced at the front end of the year, they were quite quick launches to quickly get us into the space where we can make projects real. And what really matters to all of us, I think, in the work we do is making stuff real and changing our cities for the better. Recognising the behaviour is a bit different at this moment in time. But we're actively built something in lockdown called West Midlands Collective. It was basically a group of people that just come together on like this with our strategic partners like Splash, Levels, we've got Arcadis on the group, we've got Homes England on the group. So we've quickly built a virtual kind of sounding board, if you like, for the ambitions of the design charter. It meets fortnightly. We've got designers and developers from all sectors, I would say, on that group: creatives, graphic designers, web designers, and we're building our way out in a virtual time. But we'll quite quickly start to bring projects forward. The Mayor has an ambition for a sky park in Digbeth, so we're working with Over the State down in Digbeth. Lucy's helping us think through how we might run a landscape competition. We're involving the Landscape Institute. We're doing loads of work with the universities, which of course are more used to working online. So we've tapped into their brilliance, if you like. I've had time to read stuff I wouldn't have read before, and network in a way around these topics. And like London, we've got an ambition in the West Midlands for it to be a new national park. And so that concept of the region as a landscape, and the core cities of Coventry, Wolverhampton and Birmingham, and the high street challenges, and the kind of housing ambitions that the region has, that's all stuff that you can develop quietly in this time. And as soon as it's safe to bring that in to construction and into dialogue in partnership, it will have to be a massive way of collaboration to push through this. And those are the partners that we're talking to, the people who share those ambitions.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and then Kathy.
I mean, I was very taken, you know, what Debbie was saying in terms of behaviours, and I think, you know, and I just took my dog for a walk this morning through Bethnal Green, and there's lots and lots of community notice boards and posters up on lampposts about mutual aid, this concept of mutual aid, about how can we reach out to each other and support each other in terms of vulnerability, and that's obviously across generations and across communities. And I think that there is this opportunity to begin to think about the mutual aid of the land uses in terms of actually, it is the infrastructure of everything. It's not just purely that infrastructure is big engineering projects, or that infrastructure is purely about transport infrastructure. We do need to think about this issue about density. We need to think about the quality of life and well-being of our children, of our elderly people. And I really, really am encouraged from our national government, from our international, commentators, from our city leaders, from our local government, every level, and in terms of what the private sector are doing, whether it's airlines, whether it's, fashion industry, but, making PPE, whether other people, really, I mean, we've been doing lots of work because we do, many of our clients are actually within the retail sector or the theatres or some of the leisure, the food and beverage and so forth. I mean, people have had to think completely outside of the box in terms of how they can do something useful and contribute at a societal level, but also think about how that they can get out of this incredible crisis for them economically and actually build a meaningful relationship with their users, with their customers, the people who walk past their stores, as well as, people who might in the future want to do some of the things that Kath is saying, which is actually participate when people feel safe about public life. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that I think that this moment provides us a window, as Louise says, to reflect and make sure that the infrastructure of everything is thought about. And that has to be about our really urgent thing beyond public health, which is obviously going to impact public health, and that is climate emergency. And therefore, I think climate action and young people, and making this a participative story about the next generation, which is actually something Publica are doing with Repowering London and Black Females in Architecture this year. We're going to do a massive programme about how the younger generation can begin to bring solutions to the table. And I think it's time for us to open our minds to listen to different people and diversify the built environment sector.
Fantastic, thank you. Kathy, could you make it brief, please, because I've got another really good question for you. Thank you.
So I would just say nothing happens without trust and relationships. And we need to make sure that we move from silos to networks and have collaboration between horizontal and vertical networks in order to push forward the agenda. That involves everybody just coming together and communicating more effectively. And I actually think that started to happen. Barriers are breaking down, people are working together, and I just think that's amazing. And I think that's something that, linking on to the climate emergency, we need to drive that behaviour forward.
Okay, thank you very much. So I was asked by Lee to talk briefly about, or to just throw in my own tuppence halfpenny's worth, and a piece of work that I've initiated called London 3.0 is really taking a fresh look at London based on the work that we did 20 odd years ago that did actually create things like business improvement districts, and really fresh, innovative thinking between the public and the private sector. And what I want from that, and you've all talked about it in different ways, is to really take an evidence-based and empathetic look at what it takes to live a life well in London. And I think we're not very good at that in cities. We do something and we move on, and we don't necessarily go back and iterate or think what is the user experience in a whole plethora of ways. And I'll just give you one example which relates to public space and emergencies like this, is where we put all of the barriers on the bridges as a consequence of the terrorist attacks. And all of the bus stops have been closed on the bridges, and it's a really awful experience if you're taking a bus on the bridge or having to get off the bridge. So nobody's ever stepped back 2.5 years later and thought, what is it like to be a pedestrian or a bus user and using that space? That's just one small example of not thinking about the user experience in public space. So in all of this, I think what I would like to create is a really sort of ongoing empathetic approach to city making, and you are all saying the same. Lucy talked about the kind of gentler approach of the post-war years that we all embrace so much. It's funny, isn't it, that all the people who are being singled out across the world as good leaders that are responding well to this COVID crisis are women, and there's quite a lot of discussion about this. And here we are, an all-women panel, talking about kindness and people and how we do things differently. So my final question, and it just needs to be a brief answer, please, is do the sexes look differently at the way we create cities? And do we need a more gendered approach to how we look at our solutions? Over to you, Debbie.
Sorry about my husband in the background. I mean, yeah, this is a really interesting debate, isn't it? And I would always hesitate to stereotype on in any sense. I think for me, I would come away from the gender stereotypes. But there is a lot of discussion about kindness, consideration, and how important that has been in this context, and how important it is we hold on to that. Whether those are female traits over male traits, I'll pass on to the next respondent to comment on.
Lucy.
Well, I have a little pet project actually, which is that I was asked to give a memorial lecture many years ago for a wonderful woman called Jane Blom Cooper, who sadly died. She was a fantastic scientist. And I look back, I called my lecture The Practical Idealist, which was actually a phrase I used from a research book looking at the history of the design research unit in the post-war years. And my thesis was that if you look to Octavia Hill, starting where you did today, Pat, and if you look through a whole range of practitioners all the way back from the Victorian era, who sat somewhere between the principal orthodoxies of planning and architecture. And if you look at them from the perspective of the 21st century, they all kind of had their finger on the button in terms of thinking about social and environmental and urban systems, and how people could actually engage with participation and listening to other people's perspectives to build consensus. And there is, there is a key theme throughout all of the people I looked at. They all happen to be people who've been either written out history or not listened to, or some of them are known, but not known that well because they were all women. And I think in terms of the way the 20th century developed, in terms of how women then played a part in terms of contributing to professional life and actually finding a way in terms of academic ways, in terms of practice, in terms of, public servants and leadership, we are right at the point of being able to reflect upon this. So with Debbie, I'm not going to make any generalizations, but I think actually there is a rich sort of seam of history that we have ignored, which as we're meeting environmental crisis and social inequality, we need to look back at those practitioners and those thought leaders and really celebrate those women, because they have clues for us, and we're just the next generation. We're just standing on their shoulders and testing this further and further.
Great, thank you very much. Kathy.
So I suppose it's that people, to create great spaces, you need to get under the skin of what it is that people want and what they want to do to use that space. Do I think that, with men versus women, like that can't be understood and it's preferably understood by one gender or not. I'm not sure. I think actually, you know, both sexes can understand what it is to create a great place. Whether or not, you know, I think it's really important what Lucy said, looking at history, and actually, is there a discourse that can be taken from history which can then be built upon now to create future amazing spaces? Now that's amazing. If that comes from lots of women, again, amazing. But I do think that, you know, I mean, it's a very difficult question, but I do think, you know, I do think that, you know, both genders can understand that and can take that forward.
Thank you very much. And Louise?
What matters to me, first and foremost, is inclusion and equality, yes, and diversity. And I'm not really interested in playing one sex off against the other. I think there's a huge amount of complementarity. I think we've got the gender debate is much more than, it's much bigger than men and women by now. So that, for me, that agenda's moved on and it's become more interesting. What is critical, I think, particularly in cities, because cities are great gathering spaces for, you know, really diverse communities of different religious faiths, different ethnicities, different genders, is how we work collectively to bring those voices together. I remember hearing a phrase years ago that history is written by the victors, and that perhaps resonates with what Lucy's been saying. I think people have been written out of history, people who have played huge roles. We haven't captured their contribution. I'm much more interested in how we move on from that place, and you know, it's great to be on a panel like this, but I would like to see far more diverse faces, different accents, different cities represented. And I know we're just at the beginning of this kind of new way of working, but let's take this as a springboard to do more. You know, the beauty of these webinars is that you could be anywhere in the world, and we had a great thing with the Design Council where we had someone in Scandinavia and someone in South Africa the other day. So that's the beauty of this time, that it allows us to be diverse, and it brings, I think there's quite an equalising impact actually in how we relate in virtual space, because there's an equal weight to the voices across the screen. So inclusion is my message, equality and diversity.
No, and it provoked all the right messages that I wanted to get out. So thank you very much. I think the most important thing is that we need to be, as Kathy said, aware of what people's needs are. And, you know, the great public space guru is the first person, Jan Gale is the first person to point out it was his wife's idea to actually start to look at people.
Thank you very much to Pat and our panel. That was a really insightful discussion, and I certainly learned a lot from it. Lots of great ideas. I love the perspective of looking at the collaboration between the private and the public sectors and involving the community. And I think there is opportunity now for real change and for really testing new ideas and this renewed purpose and value placed on public realm. So I really hope that these ladies today can move forward with their ideas. I'm absolutely sure that they can. Thank you to Pat, thank you to our panel, and thank you for you all for viewing it. Now, we will be uploading the video of today's event onto our YouTube channel, so please do subscribe, please take a look, and also the documents that we referred to today, the Design Charter for the West Midlands Combined Authority and the National Infrastructure Commission framework will all be uploaded onto the event on our website. We really want to create a resource centre so you can go back and look at relevant documents related to our various discussions. Our next event will be next Thursday, the 7th of May, and that will be a webinar on protecting housing delivery, looking at what emergency measures and what special precautions government should be putting into place to safeguard future house building across the UK. It's going to be a fascinating discussion, really, really relevant. So we have Councillor Darren Rodwell from London Borough of Barking and Dagenham, Mark Farmer, Killian Hurley, and we have Michelle Hancock and also Karen Cooksey chairing from Winkworth Sherwood. So something really good to look forward to. Do register for this on our website and we'll send you a Zoom link. So thank you very much again. And all I have to say is keep safe, be careful. Thank you from our family to yours.